Hey there, Math Mo Makers. So in this video, we're going to talk about a formative assessment strategy you need to stop doing. Yes, I said this. Formative assessment strategy you need to stop doing. This is something that we are still doing. I'm still doing a little bit. I'm trying to limit this assessment technique, but I think you are using it, and we should try to limit the amount of use that we do this. So hey, stick around to find out. Let's go. All right. Welcome to our latest video. I'm John from Make Math Moments, and if you have not yet subscribed, hit that subscribe button here on YouTube. Hit the bell so that you get notified. We are always bringing you videos of math instruction, how-to videos, but also a video like this, which is a professional development video about assessment. We're going to talk about assessment here in this video. And actually, in particular, what you're going to hear is a lesson pulled from our full assessment course inside the Make Math Moments Academy. Yeah, we have a full assessment course that I think it's like 7-module course that we've been building over the course of a year on assessment, and it is available for all of our Academy members. So we're pulling one of those lessons out, which is actually there in that module. We talk about 2 formative assessment techniques that we should stop using. And this is the second one. This is one that we should stop using. It's all about hand raising. Yeah. So I go through some of in this lesson, I go through some of the theory behind hand raising and why we need to limit that, and what are the repercussions of asking kids to raise their hands on a regular basis. So if we want to elicit student thinking, that we talk about that here, like how do we elicit student thinking as one of our math practices, but how do we elicit student thinking so that the classroom is more equitable? And also, like, how do we change that? Like, what do we do if we're going to ask kids to stop raising their hands? So let's get going. Here's that video lesson. John here from Make Math Moments. Welcome back to the assessment for growth course when we're in module 2, and now we're at lesson 2, which is another technique that we need to stop using in our classrooms. The first part of this module, lesson 1, was about how to eliminate and where you should put learning goals in your lesson. Like, do we write them at the beginning? No, we don't write them at the beginning. We write them somewhere else, or we talk about them and we make them purposeful instead of doing that robotic technique of writing them at the start. So that was one thing that we're going to try to stop using or change using in our room. The second one here is something that I still use, but I'm trying to eliminate, reduce the using this technique. It's hard to reduce this one because it's so common. It's such ingrained in the way that we were taught to teach. But we want to talk about it here on its harmful practices for some students, and why we should probably reduce this one as much as possible. So let's get into that. Reminding you that where we are in kind of the book that we're kind of referencing here to guide us on these formative assessment techniques, which is Embedded Formative Assessment from Dillian William. He's got 5 key practices that should be embedded into your daily instruction. And I said in the intro is that I was using these techniques, without actually knowing that these are the ones that he recommends, which was very nice to feel that we're doing something good. We got research to back up what we're doing, and we want to share those techniques with you and how it looks in the math class, because this book is not a math technical specific book. So what techniques in an assessment can we do in our math class or stop doing? So we're going to talk in this particular lesson about the second one, which is eliciting evidence of learning. Like, how can we get information into our teacher brains? Like, what are students learning in their class? But we're also going to add in thinking, and that's actually what the Principles to Action book from NCTM does. One of their practices, the eighth practice is to elicit and use evidence of student thinking in your actions. So they've got that tied in there too. We want to get information from the students. What are they thinking? What are they doing? What are they learning? How can we use that to inform our instruction? Remember, that's the main purpose here of formative assessment, is for you to know what the students know so that you can change or modify or push your instruction to their final learning goals. your course. If we think back to our classroom clock, we referenced this in module or lesson 1. The way that I elicited student learning for a long time is probably the way you did too, and the way I still do sometimes. But if we go back to my classroom clock, I always started with homework, and then I did my very traditional, here's what we're going to learn, learning goal went on the board, and then introductions, definitions, examples all came after, and then it was his practice time, and then that class was done. When I did this, how did I elicit student learning in this model? Or how did I get thinking? It's almost like I probably didn't get thinking out of that model of math class. I did all the thinking, and we often, Kyle and I often reference Peter Littleall's quote about thinking. Like we were doing all the thinking in our class, and we were making our lessons so that students, under the assumption students can't think, so we would do the thinking for them, or they wouldn't think. And so how do I elicit student thinking in that model? It's probably I wasn't, but here's what I thought I was doing. I asked participation questions. Like I was like, hey, put your hand up, and I'm going to ask questions like, you wanted participation, and the kids were in rows, and I would be doing an example at the board, and then I would say, well, what's the next step? And then I would wait for a hand to go up, and then I'd pick that person, right? And sometimes you'd pick that person as fast as you could, just to move on in your timing. Sometimes nobody would put their hand up, and then you'd call upon someone, and they'd be like, I don't know. And then you would move on to somebody else. You'd call on, like, I know that kid knows. I know you know. And I've even said that. I know you know this step. Like, what am I asking the question for if I even know they know it, right? So I'd ask participation questions. It gave us the illusion that they were doing thinking. They weren't. I was just trying to get them engaged, and that was a way I thought was engaging, and no one really wanted to do that. But also think about who's raising their hands in this model. Like, it's kids who already know the answer, and so they've played the game that if I put my hand up and I know the answer, my teacher is going to recognize that, and then that will look rewarding. And you are getting that information from that particular student that they know it or don't know it, which is useful information, but you're only getting it from that student who consistently raises their hand. You're missing everybody else. So raising hand only benefits the brave, right? It only benefits kids who are ready to put their hand up. It's not benefiting anyone who is shy in the class. It's not benefiting anyone who's not understanding what's going on. They're not going to raise their hand, or maybe some students will be brave enough to raise their hand and say, I don't get it. Like, you've had those kids before. Usually they'll say that in a one-on-one environment. But we're missing out on kids who are less engaged. Like they're not having a chance to increase their ability in that class. Kids who raise their hand and you answer them, they get that feedback that they're like, yep, I got it. Okay, that's good for me. They actually increase their ability in the classroom because they had that feedback loop. The kids who don't raise their hand are missing out on that. They're wondering whether their thinking is correct or not, and they're not raising their hand to get that validated. So it only benefits the brave here. And actually what's happening is something called the Matthew Effect. Because what the Matthew Effect basically is, in summary, says the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And that's what's happening when kids raise their hand in class. And I first learned about the Matthew Effect from this book, and maybe you did too, Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. The Malcolm Effect, he describes, one of the examples in the book is about OHL hockey players here in Ontario, and hockey, little league hockey, pee-wee hockey, all the younger grades hockey. When you start playing competitive hockey, the cutoff ages is January 1st, and that would put kids who are born, say, on January 1st all the way to December 31st in the same league, in the same category, like they're in the same grouping. And when kids are really young, like we're talking like 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, and even earlier when kids start playing hockey here in Canada, January 1st, kids who are born on January 1st versus kids who are born on December 31st, when you're 4 or 5, 6 years old, can have vast differences in physical size and, say, understanding of how the game's played. And so what happens is the kids who are born from January to say March are actually physically bigger than the kids who are born in November and December. And so what happens is the kids who are a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, a little bit faster in hockey at that age are getting picked to be on the travel teams, or you're getting picked to get extra coaching. And it's no fault of the kids who are born in October through December. They're just not that big yet. Now they will be. It doesn't matter later on, right? But at that stage, they don't get picked to get that extra coaching. Generally, we're not talking everybody, because Malcolm had gone to show statistics that if you looked at OHL players, which is the league before you get to the NHL here in Ontario, it's a very strong league. This is the top of the top hockey players before professional. And if you look at the rosters of a number of teams, you have a majority number of players being born between January and March, and very few, if any, players are born between November and December. And that's like astounding, right? Like, you've only got players who are near the beginning of the age category versus the end, and it's only because it happened a long time ago. So over time, the kids who were bigger got more coaching, and then when they went on to the next year, they're a little bit better than the other kids, and so then they got even more coaching, and then the rich get richer, and so they get stronger and stronger and stronger, and by the time they're ready to play professional hockey, they're already, they're the ones born in those first 3 months of the year. And it's an effect. It's called the Matthew effect. It's an effect that just happened because of the rules of the league and the age, the size differences of kids having an effect later on. Now, in math class, this happens, right? So in math class, kids who are raising their hand they're maybe a little brave. And this starts early in their career as students too. This is not just math, but in math class, kids who are getting that feedback loop because they're brave, because they're not as shy, because they have maybe a little bit more understanding on a topic, they get stronger in that field. They get stronger in mathematics, and then that carries over and over and over and again. And it kind of starts with raising our hand, and the kids who aren't raising their hand are just not getting that attention. They're not getting that feedback loop, and then it perpetuates after that. So the Matthew effect, it does exist in your classroom, and we do have to be conscious of it. So some unproductive practices here, right? Like hand raising for participation, not that awesome, because it only helps the rich get richer. The same is true for only helping kids that ask for help. If it's work time and students who are stuck and they're brave enough to call you over, they're also going to get that feedback loop. But kids who don't ask for help, they don't get that feedback loop. And there's high school teachers right now today teaching, saying, if a kid wants help, they got to ask me. And what you're doing is you're separating, you're doing the Matthew effect. The kids who are asking for help are getting help, and the kids who are not asking for that help, you're not even going over them and help them, even though you know it, because they didn't ask for it. It's like a rule that seems to kind of happen in high schools, that they're going to say, like, I'm going to teach them that if they want help, they got to ask them for help, but then they miss out on the help that they need. Another unproductive practice is the group kids based on achievement. So you put all the kids who are in the strong group, we're going to call them the Cougars, and they're all the strong kids help each other get stronger, but all the weak kids don't help each other get stronger. It's not a great practice, and it's led to lots of districts de-streaming or not tracking anymore, like putting kids in not tracking those, here in Ontario, we call it streaming. And we've actually started at the time of this recording, next year, our grade 9 program will be de-streamed. So all the kids will be in the same classes in grade 9 instead of on different tracks. So those are some unproductive practices. And it kind of also goes in line with this book, Quiet, that I've been reading, which is called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And the book is all about, now I was turned on by the book by Mary Bourassa, who did an Ignite talk a number of years ago. And I'd always put it on my to-read list. And she just talked about, kids being quiet in math class. And when I read it just this recently, I'm like, oh, makes so much sense. Because actually, even though I am here talking to you and I talk on the podcast, and it looks like that I am an extrovert, I'm actually not. I'm a very, very introverted in many ways. And this book really hit home for me. But it made me think about the students in our classrooms. And because students in our classrooms, You've got kids who are introverted, who will shy away from social settings. Social settings for introverts drain them, and it drains me to be in a social context. Kyle and I will go to a conference in in a different city. Maybe it's an NCTM conference, maybe it's OAME conference. It's a conference where we present, and I have to be very social at those conferences where I'm speaking with people in front of the room, which is somewhat nerve-wracking for an introvert. But we've also, after the conference, we talk with people, we go have lunch with people, we have dinner with people. Usually by the end of the night, I am physically and emotionally and mentally drained. Whereas Kyle, he's not here to defend himself, but Kyle will agree with me because we've had these talks many times. He's an extrovert. Kyle is very social. And actually, those social interactions with Kyle give him energy, that he will seek those out because it gives him energy, whereas it drains me. So at the end of the night, I'm ready to go to bed, and Kyle's ready to keep going. And I need that, say, quiet time to kind of like recharge. An introvert needs quiet time to recharge. So this book is talking about like how the school system and also how the world is structured to benefit extroverts. If you ask a lot of questions and if you voice your thoughts in school, you're going to benefit from those. The same is true if you work in a business, right? Like the people who speak up get noticed. And if you get noticed, you get more attention. If you get more attention, then you get stronger at whatever you're working on. And that will benefit you. And extroverts or introverts in those worlds are also looked down upon, because if you're introverted, you're like, oh, that's a social outcast. That's a person who doesn't get along with the people. Whereas that's not necessarily true. There are lots of successful introverts, and the book actually shows how it's actually great to be an introvert, but also an extrovert, and like how both need elements of both. And that's a nice thing about the book. But in math class, it goes to the Matthew effect, that if you're an introvert, you're in that math class and you're not raising your hand, or you'd rather talk to the teacher afterwards, like you're not getting that attention that you could be, and it perpetuates the thinking that and the learning that student could be doing. And we have to, as teachers, know that. We have to understand that so that we can go over to the students and talk to them, which means like the formative assessment technique that we need to stop using is asking kids to raise their hands to participate in class. I think I've kind of made that case clear here now, is that we need to stop doing this because it is only making the rich get richer. And if we go back to that quote from Peter Liljedahl about planning, our assessment, planning our lessons that kids can't or don't think, my asking kids to raise hands was that because I was just asking kind of mediocre kind of questions, and only the kids who were brave enough were putting their hands up. And then they were getting stronger. The kids who are, say, introverted or not as confident are not putting their hands up. Like this whole snowballs. And if we go back to, the book about, the second practice here being eliciting evidence from learning, he even says, like, you shouldn't actually raise hands. He recognizes that. But, he gives some ideas what you should do instead of not raising hands in your classroom, because it only just, keeps this rich get richer going. He has these strategies. I'll just quickly summarize the strategies he recommends, which is, using thumbs up, which would say like ask a question and all the class at the same time would put thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumbs in the middle for like understanding, not understanding, kind of like I'm on my way. So that's like a way to gauge students. Which turned into, in today's time, like clickers, like or kind of polls you could do in your classroom with your devices. Same type of thing. He would recommend random popsicle stick drawing. So you got popsicle sticks at the front. You're asking a question at the front, and you pull a popsicle stick, and then that kid has to answer. So he argues that everyone has to be on their toes. There's no like disengagement. And you already know that sometimes this works, sometimes this doesn't, because if you call on that kid, the kid's gonna be like, I don't know. And this is maybe the introvert just saying, I don't want to answer this right now, Mr. Orr. I am not comfortable in this classroom yet. So it's really called cold calling on kids. You're just not asking them to raise their hand, but you're maybe putting them on the spot. He says question shells, which is like he gives like starter sentences and then everyone has to answer. And then hot seat is particularly like pointing out on one kid and then having them answer questions and everyone else deciding if that kid is answering them right. So those are the techniques he's saying to do instead of raising hands. However, that I feel like that in my class, I'd rather have all like the one of the not so great things about each of these recommendations by Dylan William is that it still puts one kid as the center and then everyone else kind of watching or listening or interacting. And what we want to do in our class to get as much formative assessment information as we can is have all the kids work on those questions and not just one kid and then everyone else kind of wondering if that kid's right. And the key here is that you're, as a teacher, you're not listening to their answers or watching their work to see if they're right, like correctness wise. You're listening to see how they think, and I think that that's different. Like, because knowing a student's strategy was correct is important, or maybe even more important to know that their strategy is wrong, right? Or it's just misplaced, or where is that misconception? That's so important to know about, and I think we need to listen more in our classroom. So in order to listen more, you actually have to make those lessons active, and you want to do it for every kid, not just one kid and everyone else thinks. Like, I want to make all my lessons active for every student. This is what led me to Peter Lillell's work, where we're using whiteboards at the walls, like posing a question, then everyone works on that question, and then you walk around and listen to what's happening. I just want to share with you one quick lesson that I did with my students to make them active at the beginning of the lesson and throughout the lesson. And I learned so much when I use a lesson like this, and we're going to talk about lessons like that also in lesson 5 of this module. But I learned so much because you're getting all that information from students by listening to them. So I want to share with you a lesson that I did with my students that made everyone active at the walls, and not just one person doing thinking, not me doing the thinking, that make them do the thinking, and everyone was doing thinking, and I was listening. And so this particular lesson, I used Peter Lillell's work to ask kids to work on vertical non-permanent surfaces. So I asked them to move to the wall spaces where I have whiteboards around the room or chalkboards. And I had visible random grouping. So I randomly grouped them so they could see who was being grouped, and it wasn't like hidden, which meant like I didn't prearrange the groups. They saw it live in effect that they were randomly grouped. In pairs. I had them work in pairs. And so the first thing I had them do was I had them just draw a tree that was 20 units tall, and I had them do that on the chart paper, which had grid spots on them. So a white book flip charts are great because on one side it's clean, and then like white, and on the other side it has a grid. And so we used the grid side. They drew a tree with 20 units tall, any tree they wanted, whatever it looked like. Then right beside it, I wanted them to draw a tree that was less than 50% of the height. And this was a percentage type lesson. I wanted students to understand how to calculate percent of different values of totals. So they did that. What does that tree look like? So we had like stuff that looks like this. And they just started off. They could show that it's 20 units high. Everyone's being active here. I'm walking around watching. Hey, do they get this 50% idea? This is pretty easy for them, pretty straightforward. Most people and students understand what 50% is, but they don't understand like exactly like if it's 20 units tall, what 38% might look like, right? So that's kind of where we were going. So then we had them ease into this a little bit more. We're doing, low floor, high ceiling in a moment here. We've got what would a tree look like that's more than 50% of the height? Like, what does that mean? Have a discussion here. I listen to what's happening so that it's giving me information. Who is understanding this idea of percentages and more versus less? We're also following the curiosity path here, which we talk a lot about in our signature course, the online workshop. This task is meeting the withholding information. Like we're not giving them everything up front. We're not saying the learning goal at the start. We're giving them a chance to anticipate, like predict and draw. We ask them to notice and wonder a little bit, like they get to draw their own trees, and we're asking them to predict and estimate. So they're doing a little bit of that as we go. And so then we start to narrow it down a little bit. I asked them to draw a tree that was exactly 30% of the height. And this is the part we want to listen very closely on, because we're not doing these very set standards of 50% anymore. And it looks like on our curiosity path here, like I could, where I'm going is I could just show them how to solve that problem. This is my old self would have done that, which would lead to an algorithm or lead to a set of procedures. Or I could allow the productive struggle to happen and listen and learn from what my students know, so that it informs me. This is our formative assessment technique. And then I can help them fuel their own sense making, which we all say here at Make Math Moments leads to memorable math moments, which is the foundation of everything we're working towards here in the academy, but also on the podcast and on our workshops and courses. So that you're at this kind of junction, but we want to steer them towards this productive struggle part. And so when you ask them to draw all this, so where does 30% lead? I want to see those strategies. And those strategies is the eliciting the learning, right? So I'm thinking, I want to see that so that it can help me get there. And I'm not asking kids to raise their hand, and we're not asking kids to just do one thing and everyone else watch. Everyone's trying this. Everyone's talking about strategies, and I think this is such a better approach, a better technique than just raising hands. Get everyone engaged. So we could share out some strategies at this point, like what did you do to get 30%, and what height would that be? And what did you do to get 30%? There are different strategies that happened here. Then what we move on is like, what does exactly 85% look like? And again, for listening to those strategies and hearing what kids are doing, we're sharing them out as we go. And then we get a little bit tougher, right? Like, what does 62% look like? We again take a moment to share strategies and talk about how do we get to 62? This might be the moment after we share those where we step in and share another strategy if it didn't show up on how to get to that. Like, what would the tree height be if it was exactly 62%? How can we get there? This might be a teacher moment where we can introduce a strategy that can be helpful. And this is if we refer to this, we refer to this graph, the attention time graph here of a lesson in our online workshop. Where this productive struggle is happening, and we get to this moment. That's that moment I'm talking about, where the green dot is, where kids are struggling maybe to find the 62% and not sure exactly where. We get to step in and kind of share a strategy that might work. So then that might be like, let's draw the tree, but on a line and it's like a number line. On one side we look at percentages, on the other side we look at units. It's like a double number line, but we've tipped it up, and we can see how we used what we did with 30% and 85%, which were kind of more benchmarky numbers, to apply that same strategy here when we have an ugly number, right? Like 62%, which is not a nice benchmark kind of number. So that we look at a type strategy there, and then we use that strategy to do some more. Like, well, let's look at 70%, and we got student thinking, again, now happening after that, not just hand raising, not just me walking through the examples. And so you can see some of that thinking happening across, maybe we're going to go higher. And so, again, you can see some of that work happening, and it's just, you can, at that point, it's this full student engagement. Let's go and get all these percentages here for a different tree height, and now it's 15 units, and so you get images like this and thinking that happens like that. So if we refer back to the purpose of this particular lesson in the module, is we wanted to talk about assessment practice number 2 from Dylan William, which is eliciting evidence of learning. But we said, let's stop raising our hands. Like, that, I think, is hurting more kids than helping. Let's design lessons that have active thinking and ways to engage all thinkers so that you can minimize the Matthew effect in your classroom. Hopefully that gives you some tips and strategies on your formative assessment journey. That ends lesson 2 from this module, and I will see you in lesson 3, which is all about feedback. Hey there, Math Moment Makers. Welcome back. What you just saw was a lesson from our Make Math Moments Academy. We have a full course in there called Assessment for Growth. And you saw one of the assessment strategies that we need to stop using or limit using, and we talk about 2 of them in that, say, that module. But we have 7 modules in that course, ranging from formative assessment strategies to standards-based grading and how that looks, and setting up portfolios in your classroom. Thinking about like why we should be modifying our assessment strategies. A full course for you to use from any grade level. Specifically the middle school grade levels and into high school grade levels. So we've building that for over a year, and it is fully available to every Academy member. And I'm just going to show you a quick preview here behind me. You're seeing that same lesson that you just watched here inside the Academy. Over to the left here of my screen, you'll see them crossed out because we've completed those, just because it's marks complete once you've completed those lessons. But you're seeing the different lessons in Module 2, which is all about formative assessment strategies. We got problem-based tasks as a formative assessment, gold mine. We got standards-based grading in Module 3. Module 4 is all about like how do you build time for assessment, and what do your class lessons look like so that you can save time. So there's lessons on that. Module 5 is about how to help key stakeholders change or understand what you're trying to do in your classroom, because that's a big barrier sometimes to changing your assessment strategies. Is kids try to resist a little bit. Parents are going to be questioning things. Administrators, colleagues, how do you handle that? What are the things you say? Then we also have 2 case studies here, interviews with teachers who have modified their classrooms. Interviews that we went through with those people on the podcast, but also in, say, here for this course. So full module there. If you want to grab that, you can also, anybody can get in the Academy. There is first 30 days for free, which is more than enough to actually go through that course. If you spend some time every day looking at that, you can get that done inside the 30 days. Otherwise, hey, you can sign up and subscribe, and then you have that access to that course, but also all the other courses we have, plus all the tasks and the teacher guides that go along with our Academy membership. So thanks for watching this video, and make sure you check out our next one coming up soon.